Welcome to the KUBIK Report. Today, I am pleased to share my 16th podcast with Greg Thomas, and I am happy once again to have him joining us on the KUBIK Report. Hello, Greg.
Hi, Vic. It's great to be here.
We've had a little bit of a break here, and after 16 podcasts, I could not believe that we did that. But I went back to the list that we have done, and sure enough, after a year and a half or so, we've done 16 podcasts. So I'm looking forward to this. Greg is a business leader, author, keynote speaker, and a personal life coach that I have known for nearly 2 decades. His clients range from large Fortune 100 corporations down to small family-owned businesses, and many individual clients seeking personal leadership development. His website is LeadershipExcellenceNow.com. As a reminder, you can learn more about Greg's training skills on his YouTube site. Simply type in Leadership Excellence Channel on the YouTube homepage search bar, and you will find him. So in the past, we have spoken with Greg about a lot of interesting topics, including personal leadership development, business leadership, servant leadership, how to have a fulfilling and productive day, and the common misconceptions about the law of attraction. The past few episodes, we have spoken about effective communication and avoiding conversational terrorism. So, saying those things that frighten people and people use to manipulate others with. Anyway, Greg, welcome to our 16th podcast together.
Well, Vic, it is great to be here. I spent a number of weeks in Florida during what was the most horrendous weather that Northern Ohio has had during the past couple of years. So I missed all that, and I've come back home and getting ready for spring, and today is sunny and the weather's beautiful here in Northern Ohio. So it's good to be back in the saddle again, and it's great to be back with you doing another podcast.
Well, I just always enjoy talking to you, as I've said, because you always have a very, very logical stream of information that's so easy to digest. And I remember you speaking to our Ambassador Bible College group in other presentations that you have had. I've always enjoyed hearing you. Today, we have chosen to discuss emotional intelligence, sometimes called emotional quotient. So first of all, Greg, what is it?
Well, Vic, that's a great question. Emotional intelligence, which is also called EI, is also called emotional quotient. That's EQ. And it's the ability to master your emotions, including the ability to perceive other people's emotions. And when you possess high EQ, you have the ability to understand your emotions, to use your emotions effectively. That includes controlling your emotions. You have the ability to manage yourself and to handle your own emotions in a conversation or in a meeting or with a team. And you're also aware of other people's emotions, and you make an effort to understand their concerns with empathy, and at times to even de-escalate tension when you sense that there is tension in a conversation. So it's all about guiding, maintaining mature emotional response in communication.
So you not only communicate by saying things and communicating data and information, you're very much in the other person's shoes, trying to figure out how that's being taken and how it's being absorbed. And what are they thinking while you're talking, right?
Yeah, exactly. You may recall an episode we had on active listening. And just to refresh your listeners' understanding of that, active listening is when we suspend all prejudgment, when we focus on what someone else is saying, and we lock into every word they're saying, focus on their emotions, their verbal, their nonverbal cues, and what they're actually saying rather than thinking about what we want to say next. All right, so it's showing them dignity, it's showing them respect by hearing them out and letting them say the things they need to say. So as you have grown and practiced in active listening, you are increasing your intelligent quotient because you are becoming more sensitive, showing more empathy towards others who are communicating with you. So yeah, you're exactly right.
Well, when I'm talking to you right now, I just feel like you really respond to what I say. And of course, we're doing this in audio only, although I do see you
Mhm.
visibly right now. But when talking to people, I know when I'm talking to somebody that really is tracking with me, or else he's faking it. But it's a
Mhm.
person who's listening to what I'm saying and is sympathetic to what I'm saying. He may not totally agree with what I say, but he's trying to understand. And I find that to be very useful because it leads to
Mhm.
being able to unravel and be able to work out. I hate to use the word compromise, but you kind of compromise your positions and be able to say things in a way that things work for both of you.
Well, sure. What you do is you seek a win-win, as Stephen Covey would have said. And it may not be everything that you want. It may not be everything that the other person wants, but it's something that is respectful and is going to work for both of you and is going to be sensitive to your needs and what you think is the correct thing to do.
Now, Greg, the topic of emotional intelligence is only about 50 years old. So, what is the history of this subject and how was it developed?
Thank you, Vic. That's a good question as well. And it's only about a 50-year history, approximately. The whole idea of EQ started with a gentleman named Abraham Maslow. Do you remember him?
Oh,
You've
yeah.
probably heard of the Maslow's hierarchy
Uh-huh.
of needs, right? He was an American psychologist. And of course, his hierarchy of needs said that there's a hierarchy of our needs. And he used something similar to the design of a pyramid, and that you have to achieve those base lower level needs before you can focus on higher level needs, and all the way up until you get to the point of self actualization. So he was an American psychologist, a very smart man, and he was the first one in the 1950s to use the phrase emotional strength because he realized that there's more to the human brain than just IQ. The original idea was that, well, if you have IQ, you should, in theory, because you're a very smart person, be able to make brilliant decisions, be able to bring a team together, be able to reason things out logically, be able to come to the right conclusions because you have high IQ. But in the real world, that never works. Throughout history, men who were very smart and had high IQs were miserable leaders, couldn't get along with anyone, and completely failed in their goal or their mission. On the other hand, it was observed than people who just had average IQs, in some cases, even lower IQs or lower mental acuity, people who were slow thinkers, because they had something else, were very successful in the things that they did. They achieved a lot. They were great leaders. They started great organizations or great movements throughout history. And that's something that Abraham Maslow understood and noticed. So he used the concept of emotional strength. He introduced it. And then as the years went by, we're talking about the 60s through the 80s, this concept was added to and expanded by other researchers and psychologists throughout that time. And the term emotional intelligence was first written about or appeared in a 1964 paper. So that's where the phrase first came about. And then as we move on in history, about 1983, an American developmental psychologist named Howard Gardner came up with a book. He wrote a book, Frames of Mind, and he introduced the idea that traditional types of intelligence, such as IQ, fail to fully explain cognitive ability. He said, look, there's more to reasoning and there's more to thinking, there's more to decision making than just IQ.
Hmm.
There's something missing that we're all, we in the scientific world, we who are psychologists, there's something lacking in our studies and our understanding of the human mind. And so he came up with an idea that he called multiple intelligences. And his multiple intelligences were interpersonal intelligence, which means the ability to understand others, and then intrapersonal intelligence, which is the ability to understand ourselves.
Hmm.
So he began connecting the dots that there's far more to the human mind and decision making and leadership and wisdom than just simply being smart, having a high IQ. And then as we move on, the term became widely known in a publication by Daniel Goleman. You may have heard of him.
Hmm.
He's an American psychologist. And in 1995, he had a breakthrough with a book that became very popular called Emotional Intelligence: Why It Can Matter More Than IQ. That was the name of his book. And he followed up with a number of other books that were very similar in their publications. So then organizations, because of the success of his book, organizations began studying it, and researchers began looking into this idea. And it was Johnson and Johnson, a very powerful corporation you may have heard
Oh
of, that
yeah.
makes a lot of different products. They funded a study that concluded there was a strong relationship between superior performing leaders and emotional competence or emotional intelligence. And it suggested that EI is a distinguishing factor in leadership performance, that it was so important that it made people stand out, and it was highly important in developing leadership. So then studies continue to go on, and just to humble you and I, the studies have shown that EI has been observed that women tend to have higher scores than men. So that's something, simply because they basically have much more empathy than men do because of the way that the female brain is wired and that maternal instinct. And more research has occurred over the past 20 years by various psychologists, and many have concluded that higher EI is associated with higher leadership effectiveness,
Hmm.
including the achievement of organizational goals. So they've seen a strong correlation there. Other studies, and they continue on today because it's rather a young field. It's only about 50 years old, and it's only taken off the last 20 years. And there's obviously a lot of eager researchers looking into a lot of information, but other studies have found that EI correlates positively with performance.
Hmm.
Performance in teams, performance in strong and positive relationships with others, with our coworkers, and perhaps just as importantly, very good stress management capabilities. Because you may have heard the phrase, it's lonely at the top. When
Hmm.
you're in a leadership position, it's stressful because you have things firing at you from all kinds of different directions. You sometimes feel like you're playing whack-a-mole. There's one problem and you just settle it, and two problems pop up here. You settle three problems pop up while you're working on those two. So it can be very stressful. It can be very challenging being in a leadership position. And the studies have shown that when you have high EI, that you have stronger stress and management capabilities, which is very important. So research has also suggested over time that emotional intelligence can be developed and strengthened over time. And if we can't get to that today, we'll certainly get to it in our next episode, our next podcast together. But I want to emphasize this is in contrast to IQ. Our IQs throughout our lifetimes after we reach adulthood are relatively stable. It is what it is, right? And it can be tweaked and improved slightly by more reading and greater life experiences, but it's not going to change dramatically from the time that we reach adulthood. But in contrast to that, EI is increasingly recognized as a critical factor in personal and professional success, and it can be developed. It can be developed dramatically.
And that
It can be developed and strengthened over time, but it's a process. You have to be patient with yourself. You have to allow the process to work itself out.
And that's very encouraging because people may think that I just don't get along with people. Well,
Hmm.
yeah, you can say that. And my question is, well, why don't you get along with people?
Yeah,
Did you
sure.
know why? And maybe in that why you find answers. And that is encouraging because there are people who are brilliant, sometimes promoted because of their brilliance, because of their
Hmm.
knowledge, their of facts. They're sort of a walking encyclopedia, but they just have
Hmm.
very uh, little regard for how people reacted, what people think. And I have found that to be the downfall of a leader. And especially critical is when he doesn't understand it. Yeah, they may think, well, look, I did this, I did that, I gave you this, and you're so ungrateful or whatever, not realizing that perhaps you didn't give them the things that they needed the most: the personal
Hmm.
touch, the thank you, the sense of validation, or other things that I'm sure we'll be talking about. But I think that's very, very important. If I could just say one story here
Sure.
that I have, is that one of my favorite home football team in the NFL, they had, this was probably not more than 20, 25, maybe even 30 years ago. They were a very top performing team. And then they had a defensive coach. What they had was a need for a new coach. The new coach
Hmm.
had retired or moved on to another club, and so they promoted the defensive coach to become the head coach. And the team absolutely slumped down to last place. They had one season of 2-13 or whatever, how many games that they played that year. And then the head office was trying to put a shiny face on it and said, well, I'll just give them a chance, And then the next year was equally as bad. And they just couldn't figure out what it was. And really, he was brilliant as a defensive coach, but he just had no ability to make players feel like they could do it. And they didn't really want to play for him. And here they are, they're making big bucks and everything, but he didn't want them to feel good enough, well enough, competent enough, loved enough, if you want to put it that way, to do the job that they were supposed to do. And to me, that was one of the big examples of how a person who emotionally can relate to, in this case, a football team,
Hmm.
in how he inspires, encourages, motivates, and cheers on the team as a whole. He did well as a
Sure.
defensive coach, and he did real well mechanically, but in that
Hmm.
position, he didn't do well. So I thought I'd bring in that example. Hopefully, it could be useful.
Yeah, that is a useful example. I'm going to give you a story too, kind of the opposite result though. When I was a young man in my mid 20s, I attended a college, and the college, of course, it was a very beautiful college. It received a lot of awards, and it was maintained by a very large maintenance crew. I myself was an electrician, but there were landscapers, there were custodians, there were plumbers, there were maintenance people, there were all of these individuals like myself who worked with our hands very hard to work to keep that campus looking beautiful. Well, one time the founder of that campus sent out a letter to his supporters, his contributors to the organization, and he had had an executive, part of his executive team, resign. And in his letter, he was obviously very upset over that. And he said in the letter that this man or this individual had fallen to the point where he was required to work with his hands.
Mm-hmm.
And oh, Vic, the cry, the uproar of all of us who worked with our hands daily on that campus to make it as beautiful and as appealing as it was. I mean, the outcry was unbelievable because there was just such an insensitivity with that kind of comment, and it sounded very elitist and came across as very arrogant. So that's an example of when you're not using emotional intelligence in a right way and you're influencing hundreds and hundreds of people who work for you and perhaps people who are reading your letter who do work with their hands every day as laborers or as farmers or plumbers or whatever, and how insensitive it can come across.
So, Greg, what are some of the qualities or components of emotional intelligence?
Well, Vic, they begin with self awareness, and that self awareness is recognizing one's own emotions. And it ties into self talk. We also had an episode on self talk
Mm-hmm.
and recognizing that, hey, my emotions are getting a little bit out of control. I need to throttle them in. I'm allowing things that I'm hearing to upset me, or I'm beginning to raise my voice, or I'm beginning to sound angry. So it's recognizing your emotions and their impact on the thoughts and behaviors of others. And it's having an awareness of your own strength and your own weaknesses and being candid about that and analyzing what you're really good at and understanding where your weaknesses lie, where the traps and pitfalls lie that may trigger unwise emotional response or action. So it's that self awareness is where it all begins. Then there's self regulation. That's managing your emotions, where we tell ourselves, I need to calm down. I need to just stop for a minute, take a deep breath. We manage our impulses because that's something that we tend to do as human beings. It's redirecting our disruptive emotions and maybe changing the subject or inserting some humor to kind of cut the tension in a conversation. It's thinking before acting
Hmm.
and taking some wisdom from using our self-control. There's a technique called pause and respond. Sometimes people just impulsively, immediately want to respond to everything emotionally. And a technique that you learn when you have a tendency to do that is you force yourself to pause 1 or 2 seconds before you respond. And that brief pause oftentimes will balance what's just about to come out of your mouth in a meeting or with another person, because emotional intelligence means that not everything that comes in our head should come out of our mouths. There should be a filter there, and that huge filter is called the brain. And that most of what we think should never come out of our mouths. And again, that also ties in with the self-talk that we had on a previous episode.
But Greg, sometimes a person is hard to break into a conversation. They just go on and on and on. And so a person sometimes breaks in because that's the only way that they can. Well, one person told me that the person who was a talker that way had a technique, is that he never ended a sentence on a pause. His pauses were mid sentence because you don't interrupt at that point. So he would just blow through his period. And he said, I just couldn't get a word in edgewise.
Oh, that's a common problem. That's for sure. Another quality is motivation, and that is when we learn to use positive emotions to achieve our goals and the goals of an organization. Positive emotions mean, you touched upon it a little earlier, good job. You encourage someone, you inspire them, you show appreciation for the work that they do. And rather than just pointing out every time they do something wrong, which eventually will give them an emotional bankruptcy, you do a lot of encouraging, you do a lot of praising, you do a lot of reflective talk towards them and let them know that they're appreciated, that they do a good job in everything they do. So that's using emotions in a positive way as a leader rather than a negative way. We've
Mm-hmm.
already touched upon one of the qualities, and that is empathy. And
Mm-hmm.
that's understanding and responding to others' emotions. It's understanding where they're coming from. That doesn't mean we have to agree with where they're coming from or their idea or their opinion, but it means having the sensitivity of sharing their feelings and understanding at least why they feel the way they do, and not just dismissing, oh, you shouldn't feel that way. That's not an answer. That's basically very dismissive of a
Mm-hmm.
person's feelings or opinion when you say you shouldn't feel that way. So that empathy is far more than just sympathy, which is feeling sorry for someone. When you have empathy, you're putting yourself in their shoes
And I
and you're trying to understand their position and where they're coming from.
and I find that a way to express that empathy is, obviously we're not perfect as counselors or whatever position we have. And if
Hmm.
somebody comes to us and says, I feel this way, I can say, I felt that way too. Or this is the experience that I have had too. Or I'm the way you are. I mean, not to lower yourself, but to say
Hmm.
that you know what he's talking about, and that maybe you have had that issue, whatever, and you have come to overcome it or do better at it.
And the last quality that I'll mention here are social skills. People with high emotional intelligence are really good at social skills. They build and maintain relationships, and every relationship they have, they seek to maintain a healthy relationship and to build on that relationship. They're good at building networks. Interconnecting with various people who are influencers and can help them. They're effective at communication. We had another one of our many podcasts together on effective communication. As I go through this, is amazing how many things that we've covered on your podcast here,
I
Vic,
know.
that all ties in so well together
Yeah.
with this topic. And people with high emotional intelligence are very good at conflict resolution. They seek to be peacemakers, and that can only happen, again, if you're understanding where another person is coming from rather than immediately dismissing them as wrong or you've got a bad attitude. Well, find out what is the root of that attitude. You might find out that you are the cause of that bad attitude, right? Or some experience they've had that you've been part of and shared in is part of that bad attitude. So people with high emotional intelligence are very good at conflict resolution and having healthy, positive relationships. And then social skills includes learning to be a positive influence on others. The key with being just quote a leader and a great leader are leaders who inspire teams and groups for a while to achieve goals. And that's rare enough, but a great leader, long after they're gone, has positive influence on that organization decades and decades. If you look at the case of the American founding fathers,
Hmm.
you look at a George Washington, you're talking about 200 plus years of having a positive influence on a nation of over 300 million people because of his positive example and mindset and influence at the time that he lived. So that's the difference between just being a leader and a great leader.
Hmm.
You leave a lasting positive legacy, and you have a much higher opportunity to do that when you have high emotional intelligence. So those are the basic major qualities or components of emotional intelligence.
Right. And it's not only working with individuals as a leader, but also working, as you said, with a team to making a
Mm-hmm.
team not only perform work, but to get along. And in a sense, they're going to generate their own karma. They generate
Mm-hmm.
their own ability to produce. I have seen teams that have fallen apart because of a lack of direction, even by smart people who have not made them had them guessing all the time, or who micromanaged or did other things
Mm-hmm.
that,
Mm-hmm.
that caused severe dysfunctionality in the groups. And I find that to be distressing. In my work, I have done a lot of work, of course, managing people,
Sure.
ministry, and that kind of thing. So I'm saying is that EI, emotional intelligence, is vitally important, not only from a person themselves, but also a person who manages other people to be aware of in his company or in his group.
Yeah, that's very true. And the ministry, like other professions, the bottom line is this people business. It's a people relationship career. And you've got to enjoy being with people. You've got to communicate well with people if you want to be highly successful.
Hmm.
That's for sure.
So, Greg, why is having a high emotional intelligence important?
Well, it's important because it affects every aspect of our life, including, we haven't talked about it a lot so far, our interpersonal relationships with our spouse or our family members, our children. If you're a religious person, you attend a church, your fellowship with other people, your neighbors, the person you run into at Walmart in the checkout line. It affects every aspect of our lives and our relationships. So that goes beyond just a business environment or working with teams. But speaking of a business environment, it does improve workplace performance. Having high emotional intelligence is considered a small predictor of your performance, and as many studies show, it's associated with effective leadership. It includes good interpersonal skills. We were just
Hmm.
talking about that a few minutes ago, how important that is. And it's also important with adaptability. You know, when you're in a leadership position, you cannot be too rigid. You cannot live in a world of black and white because the world technologies, the way we do things is rapidly changing. And if our thinking is fossilized, then we don't have adaptability. We're not open minded enough to embrace new opportunities or new technologies or new ways to do things or get things done because we are too rigid in our thinking. So people with high EI have adaptability, and that's very important in the workplace. We've already talked about interpersonal relationships, managing our own emotions and learning to guide and help the emotions of others if we sense that they're getting highly emotional or they're getting irrational, and saying things to calm them down, saying things to reduce the tension in a conversation helps in building a fulfilling and stronger personal relationship with others, and also professional relationships, something that may happen or be necessary on the job. We already touched earlier about stress management, being a leader, and I'm talking about leading your family as well as leading a business. It can be very stressful. A lot flying at you at one time, a lot of decisions. Normally, we have a greater demand for our resources, whether you're a business executive or a mom. We usually have a greater demand for our resources than we have resources. So we're trying to juggle a lot of things and keep our priorities straight. And EI helps us to be better equipped to handle stress and pressure. We have better health, and studies show that it reduces anxiety, that we have a more balanced emotional response to pressures and difficulties. And it also shows that people who have high EI have less depression.
Hmm.
They tend to be encouragers. They tend to be able to, if I can use the phrase, roll with the punches when things don't work out the way that they hoped. And finally, it's far better decision making, because when you have high emotional intelligence, you have a more balanced and thoughtful decision making process. You're not making decisions by knee jerk.
Hmm.
You're not making impulsive decisions. You're slowing down. You're thinking things through. You're getting the input of other people. You're not emotionally responding to something that someone says because they don't agree with you, or maybe it's contrary to what you think, but you listen to them. You hear them out. You seek all kinds of input and wisdom so that you can make the best decision. And sometimes the best decision is contrary to our own opinion.
Hmm.
It's contrary to what we think. So it's the humility of realizing that if we take a lot of input in, if we separate our emotions from reasoning and logic, that we have a greater chance of making a more balanced and thoughtful decision.
Well, that's tremendous and good wisdom there. I know that if you have those with whom you're consulting with, or a work
Mm-hmm.
group or a team, and you hear what they have to say, or even if they say something that's different to what you think, or just somehow you come to a solution, and if you
Mm-hmm.
both come to it, you both feel good about it, it'll happen. But if it's something
Sure.
which is pushed down their throat, or something that they don't want to do, even if it's a good thing,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
you can find yourself being in a position to where it'll fail, and that's very, very sad. You talk about emotional intelligence. I may not have in my career heard of that term just used that way. You say it's only 50 years around. I've heard
Mm-hmm.
it, maybe called by different things, but it is
Right.
extremely vital to seeking out the kind of leadership, the kind of help, the kind of working together that an organization needs. And I thank you so much, Greg, for talking about this subject and bringing it up.
Well, Vic, it's been a delight, and it is an important topic, and it's kind of the missing link on why just being smart or having high IQ isn't enough. That there's another major portion of the human mind and our thinking that is a critical factor, and that critical factor is emotional intelligence. And I hope next time that you will have me back, because I'd like to talk about how we can improve our emotional intelligence.
Okay, I would like that very much. Maybe we'll not have wait so long. I always enjoy talking to you, Greg. And I kind of was. I know that you weren't feeling well there for a while, and you've gone through some changes here with retirement. And I just thought that perhaps maybe we wouldn't have another podcast. But then
Oh,
when I called and tested you out, you were gung ho to go. So I am so thankful that we can get back on this.
you bet, and looking forward to the next one, Vic.
Okay. Thank you for joining us today. Please share this podcast and tell your friends about it. We can be found on a variety of platforms, including Spotify, YouTube, Podbean, and most other places where you get your podcasts. You can easily find us on any browser by simply typing in the KUBIK Report. You can reach me by email at vic@kubik.org. vic@kubik.org. Have a great day.